Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Ruhe, JINSA's Director of Foreign Policy. Welcome to today's JINSA webinar on Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent U.S. visit, as well as the more recent strikes in Beirut and Tehran that eliminated key Hezbollah and Hamas leaders Fuad Shukr and Ismail Haniyeh, respectively. To discuss the meaning of these momentous and fast-paced events, as well as what might come next, I'm pleased as always to be joined by JINSA's Randi and Charles Wax Senior Fellow John Hannah, as well as Elliott Abrams, who is Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, as well as Chairman of the Vandenberg Coalition. He is also a member of JINSA's Iran Policy Project and our Gaza Futures Task Force. We are joined in transit by JINSA Distinguished Fellow, IDF Retired General Yaakov Amidror. We certainly appreciate his willingness to join us at this time and while he is in motion. So there's obviously no shortage of things to cover, and I certainly want to get to Netanyahu's actual U.S. visit in due course, although since we initially scheduled and schematized this webinar, we've had rather momentous events in Beirut and Tehran. So I think I'm going to start there, and I'd like to start, as I usually do, at the 30,000-foot level, and then we'll drill down into some more specifics because there's a lot to cover. So John, I'd like to start with you and then turn to Elliott, because I'd be remiss if we didn't take advantage of the fact that we have decades of cumulative experience working Middle East issues and Middle East crises here on this webinar. So just to start off with a very broad question, is there any helpful precedent or experiences that you've had that help you understand just what we're seeing right now? We could go back as far as October 7th, but maybe even just as a snapshot of where we are right now and all the uncertainty and tension we're operating amid. So John, I'll start with you.
Wow, you surprised me with that question, Jonathan. And I'll be honest, nothing immediately comes to mind from my past experience. I mean, these last several days, the last few weeks have been quite extraordinary to my mind. If you include, what we confirmed today, the Israeli elimination of Mohammed Deif in Gaza. And then on top of this week's events, the retaliation for the atrocities at Maj al-Sham on the Golan Heights by the killing of Fuad Shukr, the number 2 in Hezbollah, in Beirut, in the heart of Hezbollah's stronghold in southern Beirut, at a point in time where everybody in Hezbollah was on alert that this was going to happen. It was coming, some form of retaliation, and yet Israel was still able to have the intelligence, the penetration, the ability to reach out and touch and kill him in a very, very targeted strike that did have some collateral casualties, apparently. And then within 7 hours to go to the belly of the beast and strike in downtown Tehran in the middle of an inauguration of an Iranian president in a building controlled by the IRGC, with the head of Hamas's political bureau being the target, with all those other dignitaries in town, to be able to do that. What it does remind me of from my time in government, and I think has only been proven, over the last week, again, underscored with several exclamation marks, that I think it's worth everybody remembering, and it's a really useful reminder that this is an extraordinary capability that the IDF and the Mossad and Israeli intelligence have demonstrated here. To have an ally with this kind of strength and power and reach and willingness to take risks, to go after our common enemies. If you told me, would you be willing to pay $3 billion a year for that? I'd say at a moment's notice. If you told me we could have that kind of capability in the heart of Moscow or in the heart of Beijing, or in Pyongyang, to undertake these kinds of operations, it's almost priceless. And I think it's just a very, very useful reminder as we've gone over the past 10 months and had all of these ups and downs of just how extraordinarily valuable this partnership, the strategic partnership is between the United States and Israel. I mean, Shukr has been a guy on an American terrorist list with a bounty on his head for killing 241 U.S. Marines for more than 40 years. I mean, that raises entire other questions of how many times have we actually put in place operations and plans to try and settle our accounts with this guy. And I'm not aware of any. He seemed to be living pretty comfortably in southern Beirut and conducting all kinds of lethal operations, which raises all kinds of questions about America's Iran and Hezbollah strategy over the last 40 years. But that's, a subject maybe for another day. But that's what I was struck by this week, just a incredibly useful reminder of the value of this strategic relationship to America in this incredibly volatile and unstable part of the world, to have a military intelligence partner of this kind of capability. I'm not sure it exists anywhere else in the world for us.
Thank you, John. And I guess, Elliott, I'll reformulate my initial question. I'll keep it just as broad, but John mentioned what he was most struck by in the events of the past week. I guess, given your vast experience working with this region, what stands out to you, or it's, to give us a sense of scale and perspective on what we're seeing?
I think we should think about times when Israel has struck in Iran, or struck Iranians. I mean, Soleimani obviously is the most famous incident, but the killing of Fakhrizadeh, the nuclear scientist, in Iran is another example. There have been others. The Iranian response, which presumably will come in the next days or weeks, was not all that great in those cases. There was rhetoric about Soleimani, but very little happened in the ensuing months. Same for Fakhrizadeh. This is different in part because it's downtown Tehran. Neither of those were. It's an international celebration for them of their new president. And you've had the supreme leader now get personally involved and allow his name to be used in saying there will be a reaction. So I have to assume there will be a military reaction. The question I guess we all face is the one we have faced every time Israel hits an Iranian asset or a Hezbollah asset, which is, will there be a symbolic reply? Will there be a reply at the same level, or will there be an escalation, an action that Israel is going to be obliged to respond to? On April 14th, we saw a massive Iranian attack, and I don't share the view that it was meant to fail. I think it was meant to kill Israelis, which it simply could not accomplish. We could see an attack on that level. We could see theoretically a larger attack. We could see, and I think this is a critical question, does the Iranian response involve Hezbollah? Mm-hmm. Or is it purely Iranian, that is Iran against Israel? And I think we just, there's no exact precedent to the situation that we are in. So, what am I saying? It's difficult to predict, and there's no exact precedent, which makes it a very dangerous moment.
So I certainly want to get General Amidror's thoughts, but my intention is to backload the questions for him until he's home and stationary. But of course, General, feel free to chime in with all these questions are implicitly for you as well, if you'd care to chime in. So I guess I want to pick up on something John sort of mentioned, and John, I apologize. You said let's save it for another webinar, but here I'm going to bring it up right now, which is, there's obviously a lot of political uncertainty here in the United States at the moment. Some of that is forecast forward to January, but you mentioned, potentially there's, Biden has been kind of silent during this crisis. To offer my 2 cents, we've seen, Secretary Austin saying yesterday, we'll come to Israel's defense if Hezbollah attacks, but that's also sort of leavened by sort of repeated claims we don't want to see escalation. We're surging naval power to the region. This is a long windup to ask, do you see much of a sort of a coherent U.S. approach in response to everything in the past week? Because in some sense, this was perhaps not entirely surprising that we find ourselves in a situation like this, even if the specific attacks over the last week were themselves individually surprising. Have you seen much to feel heartened by the U.S. reaction, or am I overstating it by saying there's been much of a U.S. policy so far, or U.S. posture?
Well, I think there is I think you're right. There's a lack of clarity, Jonathan. I mean, on the upside, the U.S. actually, the Israeli strikes got all the headlines, but the U.S. did, for the first time since February, take action inside of Iraq to go after some of their militias that have been threatening us again recently. It was a fairly small strike, I think killed a handful of people, but it was action, and it suggests that at least the U.S. military and CENTCOM continue to be on alert. I've got to say that as far as Washington's concerned, our our defense minister and our Secretary of State have been abroad in Asia at this time, but the president himself this week so far has been largely absent, certainly absent publicly. I'm not aware that he's actually spoken to this crisis as we sit here on the verge of, as close as we've been to, walking into a major regional war as we've been over the last 10 months, probably, certainly since April 13th or 14th. So I think, the president's supposed to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu tonight, but I do think this is a very uncertain time with a lame duck president who, let's just say the public perception is there are questions about any kind of diminished capacity that he has as a leader. We have a vice president who's completely focused on running her campaign. So I think there are real question marks out there, and I think the administration needs to be as attentive to that as possible. These statements coming out from the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, it's good the Secretary of Defense said what he said about we're going to continue to support Israel if it's attacked. But I just think there hasn't been any real coherence with the Secretary of State, as you said, giving a completely different message, entirely focused on ceasefires and de-escalation and ending the cycle of violence. There needs to be a coherent message that we want to avoid a regional war, but Iran and Hezbollah and all of their proxies in the Ring of Fire need to be on notice that if they overstep and overreach here, they should have absolutely no doubt that they will not be facing an Israeli response alone, but that the United States will be there both in the defense of Israel and ensuring that Israel has what it needs to climb up this escalation ladder and deal with its adversaries, our adversaries, decisively.
So that actually tees up well sort of a follow-on question for Elliott that's maybe a little more pointed. And a good reminder for me to say to our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll try to get to them in turn. So Elliott, one of the questions from our audience, and it builds on what John was saying, is, if push comes to shove, if war is initiated with Iran, however that may come about, or Hezbollah, will America provide the military supplies Israel needs? And then the follow-on is, would America even enter the conflict? I know that's $1 million question and in some way unanswerable, but I also think a very interesting one to ponder.
I believe the United States would certainly do what it has done in the last year since October. That is, resupply Israel for arms and ammunition it needs to the extent that we are able, and one would really have to ask, depending on the particular weapon system. After all that we've given Israel since October, how are our stocks? But if you assume that they're okay, then I think that the president would authorize constant resupply of Israel and defense of Israel, certainly along the lines that we saw in April, where CENTCOM coordinated air defense. The larger question, the harder question is, of course, would the United States take part in an attack on Israel, from on either Hezbollah or Iran, from bases in the region, from carriers, from bases out of the region. And we've not done that. If you go back to Nixon in '73, right up through April of this year, we have never done that. And I think that we would be purely speculating with no real basis as to what would happen if Israel were in a kind of extremely vulnerable position. Would the United States, for example, hit launchers of rockets heading for Israel? I would think that launchers coming from, for example, Yemen, from the Houthis, are a sort of easier candidate than the United States attacking in Lebanon or in Iran. But again, this gets us back to the question of what Iran is going to try to do and what capacity do they have. For example, Hezbollah has a much greater capacity than Iran to harm Israel, partly because of the distance question. The ability to defend against Hezbollah rockets that are a minute away is much less than the ability in with respect to Iran, where drones are hours and hours away, even missiles are 10, 15, 20 minutes away. So the question would arise of the United States getting involved, I think, only in case of a massive ground war between Israel and Hezbollah. The Israelis have never asked for American ground involvement, nor have they actually asked for offensive involvement in any of their previous wars, and I don't see that happening. To me, the question is, what can the United States do to help defend Israel? And what can the United States give Israel to defend itself? And I think we would clearly see both of those.
So, Elliott, just a follow-up question. I want to preface, this is from a VOA reporter who has joined our call.
What? Not off the record?
That's news to me. So the question is Israel militarily capable of winning a multi-front war? And I know this is a question also potentially for General Amidror, but I want to let him get situated first.
Well, Hamas has been pretty well decimated. So we're talking really on the ground about a one-front war, which is Lebanon. I mean, Jordanian troops are not going to invade Israel. The Iraqi army is not going to. This is not 1948 or 1967. And Iran's ability is essentially the missile attack. I don't think much of the Iranian Air Force. Yeah. So the multi-front war is a war which would, if it happened, be an air assault from Iran and its proxies, and a ground assault from one of them, Hezbollah. That air war would do some damage in Israel, depending on how many rounds of it the Iranians and Hezbollah kept up. I'm less concerned about the damage that a ground war would do because I think the IDF has the ability to keep Hezbollah troops from moving deeply into Israel, particularly right now, when actually southern Lebanon has largely been cleared of people. So the air war is the part that could do enormous damage to Israel, and particularly Hezbollah's very large number of assets that include the ability, perhaps, to overwhelm the defensive systems if they shoot everything. And of course, the targetable missiles. But you have to ask the question then. Iran has always viewed Hezbollah as its second strike capability, its deterrent to protect its nuclear program. Do they want to expend it at the risk of its destruction over something else, an insult in the killing of Haniyeh, or on behalf of the Palestinians? We know the answer on the Palestinians. The answer is no. And Haniyeh, you know, it was very embarrassing, but Haniyeh was not an Iranian. I don't think, and you know, this may be the wish being father to the thought, that they want that great struggle between Israel and Hezbollah yet, and won't until and unless they have a nuclear arsenal. I hope that's right.
So thank you. So John, I guess to keep my string of perhaps unanswerable questions unbroken, Elliott mentioned Hezbollah is essentially not allowed to get into its own war with Israel because it's ultimately Iran's insurance capability. Would love to have your thoughts on, because in the backdrop of all this is the fact that Iran's basically on the nuclear threshold. Would that be one possible form of retaliation at this point? Is just to cross that finish line? You know, we've talked about a lot of the dilemmas of Iran-led retaliation against Israel. You know, most of that being kinetic and direct. But what do you think of that proposition I'm throwing out?
It's certainly an interesting one and possible. It's not entirely clear what has stopped Iran from crossing the threshold. It's now obviously so close, and as you've written, Jonathan, if they decided to make a dash to develop a small nuclear arsenal, they could probably do it faster than the West would be able to organize itself in a response. Just in this context, I'd note that we had a worrisome development yesterday. I'm not sure what to make of it, with Lindsey Graham going public about a briefing he had just received from the intelligence community about how close Iran was to actually getting its hands on a weapon, with him suggesting that if something doesn't change about U.S. strategy towards Iran nuclear program, we could be facing a nuclear Iran in a matter of a few months even. So that's all very, very worrisome. And I do think it's, it's not something that we've discussed much over the last 10 months. We've all been distracted by the wars in Gaza, the kind of war of attrition that people have been fighting in the north. Now the possibility of again moving toward a larger conflict, depending on Hezbollah and Iran respond, but looming out there, not getting sufficient attention. I'm not sure it's being sufficiently discussed even privately between the United States and Israel. What are we going to do about this Iranian nuclear program? Because it seems to me that the decision is almost entirely in Iran's hands now about at what point in time the supreme leader wants to make this dash to secret away enough highly enriched uranium. We've also got new reports today that this new facility they're building under this huge mountain outside Natanz, deeper than any other facility they've built before, including Fordow, that is almost certainly going to be a place where they're going to be conducting covert enrichment for a nuclear program. At what point in time does that become operational? And what's our plan to stop it from becoming operational? All of those are big question marks. And depending on a decision by the supreme leader that he can go for a bomb at a time of his choosing is just not a good place for the United States and Israel to be. So, we're at a point now where those discussions, I hope, are really happening. I fear that they haven't been happening.
So I want to welcome General Amidror. Thank you for joining us. And we will at some point get to discussing Netanyahu's visit before the hour is up. But General Amidror, I have a question from a Voice of America reporter, if you'd be interested in answering. Does the killing of Ismail Haniyeh affect the current efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza?
It's a good question. I want to say something about Gaza because the picture is not well understood without describing the situation in Gaza. In Gaza, we are almost towards the end of the beginning. We dismantled 22 out of the 24 battalions that Hamas had. All the 5 brigades are not functioning. We succeeded probably to eliminate all, maybe there is another place, but probably all the manufacturing places of both Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We are now isolating Gaza from Egypt so they cannot smuggle in, not under the table and on the table. And in a way now, Gaza is an island within which we are eroding the capabilities of Hamas. Just to make you understand the situation, no one in Israel asked the question, what will be the reaction of Hamas from Gaza for the assassination of Haniyeh? And because Hamas militarily is becoming less and less relevant to the situation in the Middle East. Yes, we have enough work to do there. We will be busy with Gaza another year probably to clean it up. But Hamas as a military organization, and this is the question which was not asked, symbolized the success of the IDF to neutralize most of the military capabilities of Hamas. Not all of them. It will take time, but it is the majority. If it is 70% or 80%, we can argue it doesn't matter. You cannot understand the whole picture without taking into account that Gaza slowly, within 2 months, 3 months, will be irrelevant from the military point of view. They cannot attack Israel from Gaza anymore. The ceasefire might change the schedule because that will bring Hamas the oxygen which is needed. Now they stopped the negotiations. They didn't say till when. And they will have to make a decision. At the end of the day, the negotiator was not Haniyeh. The negotiator was Sinwar in Gaza. Haniyeh was the guy who met the Qataris, but the decisions and the whole tactic and strategy came from Sinwar, and Sinwar is still in Gaza probably, and he will have to take into consideration the situation in Gaza, not the situation in the 5-star hotel in Qatar, or 6 stars. So this is one element that should be remembered all the time, that Israel is profoundly changing the situation in Gaza from the military point of view. And Hamas in Gaza is less and less relevant militarily. The success to eliminate Mohammed Def was one part in these efforts. There are others that are still in the list, and they will get their punishment one day. But no question that militarily Hamas in Gaza is less and less important to the future of the Middle East. And in this context, you have to look at the assassination of the guy in Beirut, which was a pure retaliation to the killing of 12 Druze children in the Golan Heights, and the elimination of Haniyeh, which is part of the efforts of Israel to eliminate the leadership of Hamas. Was it done by Israel or not? I don't know. But it fits the policy of Israel. If it was done by Israel or not, I don't know. If it's done by someone else, we are more than happy that it happened. What is the reaction that we are expecting? First of all, Israel is in a very high readiness. No one in the army is at home today. In the next few days, the whole staff will remain in the camps and around the Gaza and more than that around Lebanon. We know that there are preparations. They have to make decisions. They want, as they said, to coordinate between the reactions. They probably recruit the Houthis to take part in this reaction. The Houthis are a long arm of Iran. They're doing what Iran wants, and this is if they decide, if the Iranians decide, the Houthis will act. Sorry, and we are taking it into consideration in our preparations that it will be at least from 3 fronts: Lebanon, Iran, and Yemen. We don't know if the Iraqis militias will try to add their capabilities here. In the past, in Syria, they were very, very cautious because Assad disliked the fact that they are using Syria, and at the end, he is paying the price.
But so, General Amidror, sorry to interrupt, but given everything you've laid out, certainly in America, it seemed everything is written in the mainstream press that this is a war that nobody wants. But we saw Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments after recent incidences that maybe suggest otherwise, or that Israel is prepared for something like an all-out war. Is it fair to say that Israel's risk calculus or its acceptance has changed since Majd al-Shams?
No, I think that it is a war that Hamas wanted, and it is. And remember that the day after that, or the day of the attack of Hamas, Hezbollah began to launch missiles and rockets into Israel. They launched into Israel more than 7,000, probably around 8,000 rockets and missiles, and another 2,000 anti-tank missiles. It's a huge number. It's not a big war. It's not the war in which we are bombing and crashing Hezbollah in Beirut, and they are launching rockets and missiles into Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. But it is a war in which we killed more than 550 Hezbollah and other organizations members, and they killed almost 50 Israelis, including the children. I mean, it's not a big war that we spoke about all the time, but it is a attrition war. There are 80,000 Israelis out of their homes, refugees in Israel. So what we understand is that we cannot continue with the same war when Hamas in Beirut doesn't pay any price. Do we want the war now? Probably not. But if there is a need, we will do it. The retaliation was very, very limited one to show that we can, with the belief that because Hezbollah up till now didn't show that it wants a big war, they will be very careful in their reaction. The combination of the formal announcement that DEF was eliminated, the success to eliminate Haniyeh, we don't know by whom, and the success to eliminate this number 2 in its number 1 in the military side of Hezbollah might bring kind of a pressure on both Hezbollah and Iran to retaliate in another way. I'm not sure that that's what will happen, but we have to take it into consideration. The combination of all the 3, when they know that we are slowly finishing Hamas in Gaza, they know better than us what are the numbers and how many of them had been killed and what centers we destroyed and so on and so forth. Because Hamas has communication outside, and probably Haniyeh and the Iranians know better than us what we succeeded to do.
So thank you, General. I want to come back. I have a few more questions about Lebanon, but Just to circle back to the question of Gaza and a ceasefire, because there's obviously an American dimension to all this as well. So I guess, Elliott, I'll ask the question to you. Certainly Haniyeh's death, it's almost comical. He's been portrayed as, the negotiator, someone who's a great asset working toward a ceasefire in Gaza. I think we all know all our opinions on that take, but that's a way of asking, from the American perspective, because there's a massive U.S. dimension of these ceasefire talks. Do you think Haniyeh's death will impact the U.S. approach or the likelihood of a ceasefire? Or are there many factors?
You have two Americans in the panel, you can ask them.
Oh, yes.
I would say it will not affect the American approach. It will cause a delay. Hamas has to choose who will replace Haniyeh as the negotiator, the interface with the Qataris, and it's probably unseemly for them to do that overnight. And they don't want to appear weak, so they don't want to rush into a negotiation and make further compromises overnight. So my guess, my estimate would be those who say that this killing will cause a delay in the hostage negotiations are right. The question is it a 3-day delay or a 1-week delay? The United States will keep trying. The Qataris made the remark that, how can you negotiate if one side is killing the negotiator or the other side? The answer to that is what General Amidror said, which is Haniyeh was the face of the other side. Sinwar is the decision maker. So all they need to do is appoint another guy to be the messenger. And I think they will do that, because I think as the military pressure grows in Gaza, Hamas's reasons for wanting a deal only get stronger.
So, John, I'll turn to you as the chair of the JINSA Vandenberg Gaza Futures Task Force. Is obviously a question that was near and dear to our efforts. And I commend everyone to go to either the JINSA or Vandenberg websites to check out that report. John, do you have any thoughts to add to Elliott's and General Amidror's on this rather thorny question of the ceasefire and the implications of Haniyeh's death?
No, I agree that it obviously introduced some kind of pause probably into the process, but I don't think it changes American policy. I do have a question in my mind, and this has been raised within the analytical community, about what's in the back of Prime Minister Netanyahu's mind. Is this enormous success of the past week in eliminating Israel's enemies and really beginning to reestablish this sense of overwhelming Israeli military and intelligence capabilities in the region to restore Israeli deterrence? Does that, together with, I guess, the Knesset going on vacation or leave for a period of time, does that give the prime minister any greater flexibility in trying to, or being willing to be more flexible on some of his positions that don't compromise Israel's military posture too much, but to go for a ceasefire, to get these poor suffering hostages back, which is obviously just at the very top of most Israelis' minds, that they need to get those people back. And obviously the IDF feels an obligation to get those people back immediately, if not, yesterday or months ago. So that's a question I don't know, or whether Haniyeh represents, the prime minister feels like he's got the leverage and he's going to continue to press and press and press and put forward very tough and demanding positions on the with regard to the ceasefire. That I don't know. Maybe General Amidror can guess better than me whether this affects the prime minister's calculations or the people around him. I just don't know the answer to that.
So General Amidror, I'll thank you, John. General Amidror, I'll turn to you and feel free to pick up on John's thought. But so with the Haniyeh's untimely or timely death in Tehran, as you mentioned, and we've heard you mention before, he's perfectly comfortable in his 6-star hotel in Doha, part of Hot Tub Hamas. Is it, do you have any thoughts on, why go to Tehran? He must have assumed the risk of anything happening was zero. Is that probably fair to say?
I don't know what was the motive to go to Tehran by those who did it. Maybe just operationally it was more convenient, and in those cases the operational circumstances are very important, because you don't want to take risk of failure in such an operation.
So, General Amidror, sort of a slight pivot. There was an article a couple of weeks back in the New Yorker by Dexter Filkins, who's a very well-known American war correspondent, who had some interesting quotes from American officials who described Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, is the devil that Israel knows, and he's been deterred since 2006, and that it's better to rather have him than whoever may replace him. This is the first chance I've had to ask an Israeli that their reactions to that statement. And it's open-ended, just searching for your reaction.
No question is that he is right. We know the guy. We know his limitations and capabilities. And it's easier in a way to deal with someone that you know so well during the years. But we knew the number two as well, and he was eliminated. So this is not a reason to keep someone alive only because you know him. But yes, we know Nasrallah, but from time to time he succeeds to surprise us. If I would have to say at the beginning of the war, if Nasrallah will make such a move that will lead to killing of almost 400 Hezbollah members, including very high-ranking commanders, and he will stay achieving nothing. I mean, what the purpose of that? Yes, there are 80,000 Israelis outside their homes, and there are refugees in Israel. But it didn't stop Israel in Gaza. Israel continue in Gaza, and as I said, I don't know if we achieve 75 or 80% of what should be achieved, and the remaining will be achieved within 2 or 3 months, and that will be complete operational control of Israel in Gaza. And the symbol of it, as I said, is it's irrelevant what there will be reaction for the assassination of Haniyeh. When Nasrallah is sitting and making his calculation, is he satisfied from this result after 10 months in which he more and more losing people and we are destroying military capabilities in the south? It's tactical level, it's not strategic, I know. But it's, even if he wants to go to war, it is a different situation, totally different situation. The special forces of Nasrallah are not anymore in the south. They had been pushed to north of the Litani. So yes, we know the guy, but from time to time he's surprising us. Probably he surprised himself.
So, and General, a follow-up question. I've heard you speak about this over the years, and there's always $1 million question: is to what extent will Hezbollah listen to leadership from Tehran about the big question of whether or not to go to war? Is it possible to, right now, do you imagine there's pressure from Tehran not to get into a big war with Israel if you're Hezbollah, or is that changed at all, or is it just?
I don't think that a pressure was needed. I think that Nasrallah understood at the beginning of the war that he will not benefit anything from going to big war in which Israel will go hell, and the situation in Lebanon is bad anyhow, and after such an operation, Lebanon will be devastating. Not because we will bomb civilian centers, because 100,000 of rockets and missiles, half of them stored under civilian buildings, and all of them will be destroyed. So I'm not sure that was needed, the what you call the pressure from Tehran. I think that it was well understood by Nasrallah, who was not ready to sacrifice Hezbollah for Palestinian war.
Do you think just one final question, and I've heard you say before, Hezbollah is not going to sacrifice itself for Hamas. Would Hezbollah risk sacrificing itself if it gets into an escalation spiral with Israel now over?
No one has an answer to this question. If it is an escalation and deterioration that no one controls, then it might happen.
Perfectly possible. I realize I've been asking a lot of unknowable questions today. We'll try to wrap up with something a little more straightforward. I do want to get to Netanyahu's visit to America, which was 6 or 7 days ago, but might as well be 6 or 7 years ago. I guess we'll start with the American perspective and then go to General Amidror for the Israeli perspective. I guess, Elliott, I'll start with you. Obviously, it happened in a context before Majdal Shams, but did you have any sort of top line takeaways from the visit, either political, strategic, anything else?
I think the downside of the speech was that there was no immediate object like opposing the JCPOA, the Iran deal, when he came to talk about that. Very focused speech. But the answer to that, I think, is that Israel, all of this that Israel is doing now is an effort, in a sense, to restore deterrence and to break that ring of fire that Iran has been trying to build. Part of that, I think, is going to the United States, being invited to speak more than anyone else in history to Congress, to get whatever it was, 50 standing ovations. I think showing that continuing tie to the United States and meeting with Biden and meeting with Trump and Harris, I think is part of this overall effort to show that far from being, if you will, compromised by the October 7th attack and the Iranian years of Iranian activity to build this ring around Israel, Israel's fighting back. It is fighting back politically and diplomatically. It is fighting back militarily. And if you put the visit in that context, it seems to me to have been more of an achievement.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything Elliott said. I think, I think he did make an effort. I think it was important to talk about the importance of Israel being a bipartisan issue in the United States, even if we all know that there's some problems with that and the way the relationship is headed, particularly within the Democratic Party. But I think it was important for the Israeli Prime Minister to come and make an effort to do that. I think it was important for him to come and make Israel's case and remind everybody about October 7th and the ring of fire that Israel is now under assault by in a very totally unprovoked fashion, and that it's engaged entirely in a defensive war that should be legitimate everywhere under international law, but especially amongst the American people. And then to remind people that we are fighting the big picture at 30,000 feet this is not a war just in Gaza against Hamas. It is a war against an Iranian axis that controls this ring of fire, that is determined to actually destroy the only Jewish state and to run the United States out of this region and to end the American-led international order since World War II, in bed with Russia, with China, with North Korea, all of them nuclear powers. This is an incredibly dangerous world. Israel is at the front lines of that fight. And as the Prime Minister said, and Americans really, really need to understand that Israel's enemies are our enemies. Israel's fight in this war against the Iranian axis is our fight. And Israel's success in this war will be an American success. So from that standpoint, I think it was a useful and important visit for him to come and do that, and to be shown that he can be welcomed here in the American Capitol after not getting an Oval Office meeting since he returned to the Prime Minister's office back in the beginning of 2023.
Yeah, and certainly there was, he came to DC at a time of, or to America at a time of, political uncertainty and transition, and certainly partisan tension as well. I guess, General Amidror, I would love to hear your perspective, and to the extent Israel's perspective.
From the Israelis' point of view, there is a huge group of Israelis that doesn't matter what the prime minister does, is negative, and he should pay the price, blah 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 blah, and it is a big part of Israel. But I think that for the average Israeli, those who are not biased by previous ideas, the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel is speaking in the Congress, accepted by all the candidates and the acting and the present president, is very important morally, because the situation in Israel, everyone understands, is very complicated. The war in Gaza continues. We don't know what will be the reaction from Lebanon and from Iran, and the Houthis are bombing Israel from time to time. So to see the prime minister accepted by most of the Americans, and in a way, in less one partisan appearance, I think it's very important. It's not that something practically happened on the ground. Every Israeli understand it is not the time that the American in its domestic issue will have the energy to agree to big offers of Israel. But the fact that it was accepted like that, and I think is very welcomed by many Israelis.
So I'm going to try to shoehorn in one last question in the few minutes we have. And John, I would like to leverage your expertise and thoughts on this. In the backdrop of everything that's been going on, perhaps an underappreciated but certainly vital country in all this is Iraq. And recently we've heard they've called for a drawdown of U.S. troops within the next year. Do you take that with a grain of salt? Do you think that's a negotiating position, or is this potentially big news that the U.S. might actually leave Iraq and indirectly might have to leave Syria as well?
Yeah, I guess I would be surprised if that happens anytime soon, but there's no doubt that the Iraqi prime minister is under enormous pressure from the Iranians and the Shiite militias, which are obviously now the most powerful force inside of Baghdad and inside of that government to make some kind of significant change in the American force presence now, which is whatever it was, 2,500. So I think my guess is that we will begin to see some changes, maybe some troops beginning to be taken out, if only as a way to make an offering to the Iraqi prime minister so he can manage his domestic politics. But there still remain important constituencies inside of Iraq, particularly outside of the Shiite community, but some within the Shiite community that perfectly understand the importance of having that American connection there in Iraq as a way to achieve some level of balance and leverage against total Iranian domination of the scene in Baghdad. But there's no doubt the Iranians and their allies in Iraq are going to try and bring tremendous pressure to bear on Soudani to get those people out.
Well, I think with that, we'll end today's webinar. It's certainly been a wide-ranging and jam-packed hour. I'd like to thank our panelists.
Jonathan, can I just make one more point that I think is important for people to make, that the Haniyeh hit underscores for me. And again,
Sure.
Not a lot of people are thinking about it. I don't know how real it is, but as Elliott said, going back several years now, the Israeli ability, or what we think is the Israeli ability to get into the crown jewels of the Iranian regime, whether it's their nuclear sites, whether it's their very top scientists, whether it's top-level political visitors inside of an IRGC safe house, essentially, suggests that the vulnerabilities and fractures and fissures inside of this regime, despite this very hard, tough, strong exterior, that there could be much greater vulnerabilities than we realize. And when you put that together with the advancements on the nuclear program, with this relentless ring of fire and obvious war of attrition to strangle and destroy Israel over the coming years and decades, I just think at some point in time, maybe after our election, the United States and Israel need to get together and figure out together how we put our heads together. What can we do, particularly on the covert side, to exploit this seething sense of dissatisfaction amongst the Iranian people for sure, but even as we saw in this IRGC safe house, that must have been compromised from the inside, is my guess, from what we're hearing about the nature of the operation inside of that apartment, that there's a lot we might be able to do to really put this regime on the back foot by playing aggressively inside of Iran. And I just think that's a point worth making and exploring and with some degree of seriousness.
Yes, 100%. And it's certainly not the first time that a seemingly stupendous operational covert surprise has been enacted upon. I'm thinking of all the strikes on Iran's nuclear program in 2020 and 21, literally deep inside the heart of that program that previously might have seemed unthinkable. So thank you for those closing remarks. And I would recommend everyone keep your eyes peeled. JINSA will have plenty of forthcoming material on a lot of the issues we described here, even during the August recess here in DC. So keep a lookout for that. And we look forward to seeing you again on a JINSA webinar soon. Thank you to all my panelists, as always, for joining. See you again next time.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, Elliott.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General.